Hello everybody and welcome to Handmade Hero, the show where we code a complete game live on stream. We need to test our font importing today and fix anything that's broken with it. If I remember correctly, there's one thing we didn't quite get to finish last weekend when we did all this stuff. It was that when you encounter in the font, in sort of the manifest, if you will, that says what kinds of information go with this font, we have a routine that's like stubbed out currently, which needs to do the import of the PNG for the font glyph. And this is just a rehash of code we already have to import the PNG and pack it into the art pack file, but we didn't do the work of actually like calling out to the correct things to do that. So we need to do a little bit of a code reorganization, just a little bit to make sure that we can reuse that same path for both cases. The case where we import a sprite and the case where we import a font glyph. So we need to do that today and then get everything debugged, which will probably, I'm sure, will take today and tomorrow to do, because there was a lot of subtlety in it, if I remember correctly. So what we want to do now is just jump into that particular implementation detail, get that working, and then we can move on to testing everything and debugging it. So I'm going to load up Handmade Hero here. Going to go ahead and do the builds, and I don't know, this probably builds okay, yeah, because we had a not implemented there. And so actually, we haven't searched for not implemented in a while. How much have we got? Let's take a look. So it looks like we've got a one hanging around here in the room generator stuff, which is fine. That looks like that's not even in there anymore. There's the one we're talking about. And then, right, we have to do the base name. So we've got two things we want to do today. This one's trivial. It's just changing getter create asset source file to be able to use a non-null terminated string, because we just kind of moved away from those, and there's still a couple old parts of the code base that still use them. I don't really want them hanging around. And then we have to do this import glyph. So those are the two things we want to do today. Let's start with this one because it's probably a little bit more straightforward. In the getter create asset source file, the original call was taking this char base name here. What I'd like to do is change it to take the base name as an actual string, which is, a length string, as opposed to a null terminated string. And so what I really want to do here is just to pull this part out and actually, implement it off of this kind of a call. And then the one that has the null terminated, if we want to, we don't really have to go patch the rest of the people who were doing this. What we can do instead here is just wrap it and then pass it along. That's not as efficient, but it's totally fine for our purposes at the moment, because, again, this is not really a hot code path that we care about. So we don't really care about the fact that maybe some people out there who are currently doing work to null terminate something that they didn't need to null terminate now don't have to do that. I don't really care. So what I'm going to do instead is just, have this thunk through to the call that uses the string itself, like so. And since we really don't use the string for anything other than matching and hashing, both of which already work off of strings, I think literally just moving the code into something where base name is marked as type string as opposed to marked as type char is probably sufficient, but let me double check. There may be one or two small things we have to do there. Just typo. But yeah, so that's it, right? So again, not really a big deal because function overloading took care of that port for us, right? We have a strings are equal and a string hash of for regular strings, so we didn't really even need to change the code. It just kind of works, right? So that's it for that. What we need to do now is go back and deal with the glyph part of things, and that's a little bit more squinky because we've got more work to do there, right? What's happening here is when we ask to import a glyph with a particular base name, we need to do all of the things we were doing before for importing PNGs. And so we want to try and figure out how to share those two code paths so that we don't have to do them twice. And what you can see here is, in the normal code path, it's kind of welded together So if we take a look in here, and this is the branch that we're talking about, when we get to the end where everything's been parsed for like our sprites or something, what you can see is that when we get into the needsful rebuild part of the code, this, where we open the file that contains the PNG, builds the checksum, right? Goes ahead and makes a stream for reading the PNG, asks it to be parsed, does an import type switch, and then picks one of the import kinds, right? And then comes out here to do the asset metadata updating. That whole series of things wants to happen here as well. And in addition to that, there was already something up here that had happened that we also care about, which is you can see we build a location that we want this thing to come from, right? So it's got a art directory associated with it that's off of the sources path. And what we want to be able to do there is we want to go off of the sources path, find the PNG file, look to see whether or not that PNG file is newer than the last time we read it, And that's what's happening here. And or report if we didn't find it, and then move on from there, right? So that's what we're trying to do here, and so I kind of want something that's going to allow me to reuse some of this code so that I'm not duplicating anything that I want to make sure happens the same way in both cases. Again, like, I don't really care too much when I'm not a fetishist when it comes to, as you know, I always try to emphasize practical programming. So I don't care about abstracting things for abstraction's sake or object-oriented programming or any of that garbage. I think it's all a waste of time. But what I do care about is not creating extra work for myself, because that's the most important thing in programming, is to not create extra work. And if we just cut and paste these things together, what's going to happen is if I need to maintain something, so if I need to change part of it, right? I'm going to have to change it in multiple places. And that becomes a maintenance headache for me when things are complicated like they are inside the asset import system. So again, the complexity of the system versus how much maintenance might be required, all these sorts of things, they combine in this case to make me nervous in a way that I don't want this code getting spread out to lots of places where each one is doing it, and then perhaps the way they're doing it ends up diverging. I don't like that idea. So what I want here is a way of making sure that the parts that are sensitive are shared so that I only have to change those parts once if I need to like update the way that it's done. So again, what I'm going to do is standard compression-oriented programming approach here. I'm going to do the cut and paste temporarily. I'm going to see what I write in import glyph, and then I'm going to try and pull out the common sections to have both code paths call those common sections. And in doing it that way, I'm hoping that I will avoid abstracting things in a way that actually makes them cumbersome, and instead focus on only abstracting those things that can be cleanly done parametrically. All right, so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and copy this part because I know it will have to happen, right? I'm going to need to do a file name. I don't need to parse it because I'm getting it passed in here. So the part that would normally come from file name is actually already done. The format string, however, would be the same, and it would need to use the HHT stem. The subdir in this case is known to always be fonts, so we can pretty much hard code that one actually, to this, because they're not allowed to come from anywhere else, at least at the moment. And then we have the bitmap base name coming in here, which is like that. And this is how we would produce that source. So again, looking at that looks like something we'll be able to compress into a common call because it's very, very structured, right? Very much what we would expect. When we go through here and do the get file path, this stuff all would be exactly the same way, and the match would be the same as well. All of these things would be exactly the same. And the needsful rebuild would be the same as well. So you can see why I think that this wants to be shared, because just looking at it, a lot of the things are exactly the same. Now, when we actually issue the error here, we do have a problem. We don't really know where we would be issuing that error to. Hopefully in here, the context has that. It does, so that makes it easier on us. So we should be able to do something like, okay, let's output to this error stream like so. and we can say file not found with this path that we looked for. That should be sufficient, right? Because we don't really need to attach a token name to it, since the path should be fairly obvious. Now, if we did want to attach a token to it, we could do it that way by having import glyph take an actual token here, because we do have one that it comes with, and it could take the tokenizer and the token. I don't know how you guys feel about that. It would be slightly better error reporting, so maybe it is worth it. In other words, maybe it's a better idea to just do something like this. And then what I could do is say, all right, it's fine. Here's the tokenizer, and here's the source token in question. It seems okay. And then when we call import glyph, when we're doing this, it's pretty easy because we would be calling it directly off of a glyph parse, right? So in here where we do glyph, are we even calling import glyph yet? Gonna be honest, I'm not sure if we ever did that. Did we? Oh yeah, we did. There we go. I'm like, where is it? I just couldn't see it because it was off the side. So in here, right, we know exactly where we would call this because we have the glyph token. So yeah, I'm just going to go ahead and say let's pass that through, because it just would lead to better error reporting, so that when you get an error, the person will get a file and line number that they can go look at to know what's wrong in their tags file. That seems like a worthwhile case, so just go ahead and pass it along, right? All right. So that's the start. That opens up the source PNG as necessary. So when we get this file, we would say, all right, check to see whether we already know about this file, see whether or not we need to do a full rebuild, et cetera, et cetera. And so then the next thing that we want to do is we want to copy the part that actually parses the PNG. So let's go through here and do that. Here's that full rebuild. This desc file index part is also the same, right? Like all of this stuff is pretty much the same. So all through here, what we would do is copy this entire block, right? There it is. And you can see through here, we would just say, all right, assuming that we were able to find a file that this thing goes with, because if we can't, then we assume that we error it out in here, and we don't want to proceed. Assuming that it worked out, what we're going to do is check to make sure that we've labeled this, and if it turns out that it moved HHAs, we need to mark a full rebuild. And then when we come through here, actually just looking at it, I'm wondering if we can just pull out this entire thing. And I don't really need to cut and paste it. If you look at what happens here, it looks like it's almost entirely reusable just directly as it is. And if we pass the import grid in here, which we could do, I think we would just be done. So I'm actually going to go ahead and say I'm not even going to bother with this one here. I'm just going to say, like, this is the update, imported asset file or something like this. So there's going to be a call here called like update imported asset data from file or something. Right. And what I'm going to do is extract this code out as that call, because it's just so obviously clear that I can. There's not a lot of point in me actually going through and changing anything, because I don't think I would change anything. So in here, we're going to have update asset data from file. That's going to take whatever we determine it actually needs to take in order for us to get in order for us to get out of it what we want. And so when I call import glyph, I'm going to call it, and similarly when when we're in here, we're going to call it like so. Now there's a little bit of a rub. The import glyph needs to be able to know what the bitmap was that it imported. And so that's going to kind of be a separate part that we need to weld into that update asset data from file. That's the one thing that's going to require a little bit of modification in order for it to be used with import glyph. But other than that, everything probably is going to be okay. If we take a look at update asset data from file now, I want to work backwards from the place where it was originally done to figure out what it actually needs to be passed for file information. Looking at it, it's pretty obvious that we're going to need the context. So, you know, because that goes through anything that's doing an import needs the information in that context. So it's going to need that. It's also going to need the, excuse me, the needs full rebuild flag, because maybe someone wants to force the full rebuild to happen. And so again, that needs to occur there. It needs to have that match file. So the this thing here that we were actually pulling out is what is the information about the source file that we've stored. That has to be there as well, because that's been found by the outer code. So we need those. And then when we come through here, we can start to see this temp arena here actually comes out of the context. I will go ahead and pull that out. Just to make it a little easier, you can see that's a thing we've got here. That just makes it so I don't have to go through and change this typing. Everything else in here looks okay. The file info needs to be passed, so meaning this platform file, basically the things that were at the top of this, you know, those need to be passed in. So this is where the file is coming from. Maybe that would go here. And what else? So all of this stuff is self-contained. So then when we come through here, we've got stuff like is art, is audio, and then we have like the import type. And you know, honestly, just looking at that, it seems kind of stupid for it to be done that way. We don't really need that is audio. We don't really need that stuff anymore. So I think I'm going to go ahead and simplify that case, and then we'll look at the next part. So for example, in here, right, we've just got this parse PNG with the image here. I feel like that is just, it's not that much code, so I feel like this is just fine, right? And in fact, we could just pull these out, right? So we've got, you know, these two here, and then the sound goes in here. And these are like that, right? And that way we're only really passing one thing down there. Wait, oops, didn't mean to do that. I meant to do that. So that way we only need to pass one thing to this function, and that is which type of content import you were intending to do. And that's the only thing that you'll have to tell me, right? That's the only thing that you'll have to tell that code. So if I go ahead and grab import type and put that up here, that should take care of that part. Looking in here at the like is audio, is art stuff, I should also look to see whether anyone actually cares about that. So no one does. It looks like the only thing that actually people care about here is the is art flag is used to do a couple things. So I think the is audio can just go away. We just don't need that. And really all we need is the one thing that says is art is true, because there's some errors and some things we do that we wouldn't do if it wasn't art, right? So that seems pretty easy. And so then in here, for something like the is art side of things, and seeing whether or not we need to make this stuff get mapped, I feel like that's something we could still do outside. I don't know exactly how I want that to happen. So this might want to not occur here, is I guess what I'm saying. I may want this to be only in the other code path. Let's put it there temporarily and see what we want to do with the line points separately. So what I'm going to do is I'm not going to unify that code path just yet. I'm going to let that happen here, right? And that way it should be such that this kind of returns some sort of a result here. And assuming that this thing matches, I guess we'll do something like this. So meaning if it thinks it's okay, right, then off we would go. So then I think that leaves us mostly, just looking at what's happening here, with just these extra things that need to get sort of sorted out, which is the fields, the template tags, and the append tags. So those are the things that need to happen to make sure that the metadata for the asset gets updated with the information that we have. And looking at that, I do think this becomes the right decision. And the reason for that is that fonts don't have updating. We get our kerning information out of the file, so we can't really edit that in the game, because if we did, it would get overwritten by the HH font utility if you ever tried to modify the font anyway. So it seems to me like that's not really something we would need to have happen. So that does suggest to me that maybe this is what it should look like. Now, if I go grab how the rest of this stuff is supposed to work, so we look in here, we've got append tags and template tags and that stuff. If we want to make that stuff work as something that's passed in, I'm going to have a place where it does get passed in. So we're going to have the append tags here. We're going to need the template as well, which is here. And the fields. So I think that's pretty much it. And then in here, we would pass that directly, so it would look something like this. And I think then that pretty much just creates the same code path we were doing before, but it has now the ability to be called from elsewhere. Now, if we actually want to call this properly, and it doesn't look like we get any errors there, so it looks like we're pretty much good to go. If we go ahead and just make sure we pass all these, well, they all should basically just be stuff that we already have. Oops, that's the wrong thing. Let's try that one more time. So if we just take the context, the match, the file info, pass those down, we know the import type, we know the needs full rebuild, we've got the fields and the template tags and the append tags, we've got everything it needs to do its job. So I think that should create a correct call, and so then we're just down to the fact that when we want to do an import glyph, excuse me, when we want to do an import glyph, we need to be able to call it here. Now, what I'm sort of seeing as I look at this is it looks like import glyph probably won't actually have to be its own function. Assuming that we make a utility that does this, because like I said, it's happening in two places and I want to make sure it happens the same, then it's really going to end up being like 2 or 3 calls total inside this import glyph thing, and there's really not, it's just going to create more work for me to call it as something separate. So I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to do instead is weld it directly into the code that does the font processing. So right here where we do this import glyph call, I'm actually just going to say, let's nerf that temporarily, and let's jam this whole block of code right in here and simplify it down in place. And I think that's going to be a more effective way to finish this off. All right, so we know that here we're going to want to do, we're going to want to do this exact stuff that we were doing. So we'll tackle that in a second. And then finally, we want to call update asset data from file. And in order to call that, we need to make sure that we actually can pass it all of the, because it needs quite a few things to be able to do that processing, right? If you just look at what goes on here. So if we need to pass all of these things, the question is, do we actually have them? And let's see. So we know we've got the context. We know we're going to determine the match. We know we're going to determine the file info. For import type, there is only one import type that we're allowing for a font, and that's going to be probably import type single tile. meaning it has to be, just one bitmap there, right? We could call it a plate. I don't really know. Okay. So if I go to process plate import versus process single tile, what am I going to see? What's the difference between those two? Here they are. So in one case, so the only difference is that plates have a higher maximum dimension. That's it. There's no, otherwise these are exactly the same. Really, we should just have one call, and all it does is pass it, right? I mean, there's nothing else. The only difference between these two is this, right? I mean, unless I'm missing something, there is no, they are exact copies. I mean, check me on this. I don't want to be wrong. So I think what we could say here is that process plate import, if all you did was take a maximum dim value, then effectively these just collapse down to one call. So if I go to the update asset data from file call here and say, well, when these are actually going through their motions, if we want to do a multi-tile, well, then it does need to do its little like search function. But if we're going to do a single tile or a plate, then really those can just call process single tile and then take either the max plate dim or the max sprite dim, right? So it would just be this exact same path, no difference, and really it's just that parameter that creates the difference. So that would allow us to get rid of process plate import and replace it with something that just takes a maximum dimension. That maximum dimension gets passed here, and we're done. So that's kind of a nice collapse as well. Anyway, point being, for that purpose, now we know if we just pass single tile, that's fine for what we were trying to do there. Where's our font? Wow, there's a lot of things called font. That's the one we're actually looking for. So in here where we do our import, when we're talking about the import type, if my head moves out of the way, we've got single tile import. The needs full rebuild, we don't really know what that's going to be. Oh, wait, well, we actually already did define it. I was going to say, it's going to be something that gets set up here, but we did do that already. So we've got that. We know we've got the fields. And then so what we're really talking about is the template tags and the append tags. Now, I think, and maybe I'm wrong about this, but I think that our template tags are just irrelevant because there's nothing really we need to set there. Let's find out. I don't actually know if that's true. So that's an import grid tags. So the asset basic category is probably something we would want to set. Which is to say that the basic categories, we don't really need to set it, but it seems like we might as well. I mean, I guess technically it just doesn't need a basic category because font glyphs are looked up directly. So I don't know. It doesn't. So I think we literally just don't care. And I don't know if that if the basic category, when you do. I don't know if it correctly checks to see. So when it does asset type equals 0 and then sets it, it looks, it looks like it's always going to chain these together. I kind of want it to just ignore anything that's type 0 though. You know what I'm saying to you? So I kind of feel like I want it to say, like, only do this if it's actually valid, Like, I don't really want to keep chain 0 stuff because you should never be looking up on a tag for a chain 0. So I'm kind of going to say let's just leave that out for now. And maybe that's a bad idea, but I think that's the way I want it. So we'll make that work eventually. In import grid tags here, that means that this is just going to be nothing. And so I can just sort of have that be, you know, something that nobody cares about. I don't actually know if we do that anywhere else here. Don't think we do. So when we do the import, I think that pretty much takes care of it. So the template tags are just garbage. And then that leaves us just with append tags. And append tags, again, I think can just be nothing. The reason I think that it can just be nothing is because, again, all of these bitmaps are not, they have no information on them. They aren't ever looked up outside of the font itself. So I think when we append it, we can just say, like, no, don't stick any tags on these things. They're completely blank. All we need to know is what the bitmap ID is, and that's the end of it, right? Okay. So the only problem that I think we're left with here is that this piece of code still needs to work. So after we do the import, we need some way of saying if we were able to like actually import this piece, this glyph, this piece of the font, we need some way of getting back what the bitmap ID actually was. And the problem is we're not going to have any way to do that because update asset data from file may actually produce lots of bitmaps, right? In the case where you've got multi-tile, it's going to just do a whole host of things, right? So there is a bit of an issue there, but I believe we are saved by the fact that since we're already doing backing storage where we say what came out of what file, if we look inside the asset system itself for those matches that we're tracking, like, you know, we're tracking these source files, if you go look at the asset source file information, it just so happens to keep all of those asset indices already. So what we should be able to do is say, look, you don't need to return me that information. I can just say, hey, after you're done, if it worked, then the asset index you actually used is going to be sitting in 00 of this source file anyway, because that's the only thing that you're actually allowed to update in a single tile export. So it kind of does work to return the stuff that we wanted it to return, so that's pretty great. And I think that just kind of works. Moving forward, I don't know if there's really anything else we need to do. I think that might just work. So I think we're basically left with just wanting this piece of code to not have sort of the duplication in it. Yeah, like, I think we just don't want that to be duplicated. I'm not, do you have, I think all of those things get handled when you close out. So those just get allocated and then closed out. Yeah, so I think this is all just fine. So really all I want to do is I just want this piece of code probably to be a little bit cleaner. I think we can wrap it all up into just one function that returns three things, these three things. And then that's it. And we can also then probably simplify this to just take that bundle directly. So I think that's it. So what I'm going to propose here is that in here we just have something along the lines of import file match, and that's just going to take this. I mean, that's just going to bundle this. So it will record whether or not there was a full rebuild. It will have the matching file, and it will have the file info. By the way, you know, maybe we have a valid flag on there. I don't know. Just to say whether everything went okay. I don't know if I really want that or not. But maybe I do. And so in here, you know, after you do it, we could just then in here say, look, if this import file match that we do, so the match now is more like this, right? If the file match is valid, then I can do this stuff. And by the way, maybe I pass that directly, so we don't need to send this and we don't need to send that because they're already bundled up in this thing, which just makes it cleaner so that you don't have all these things spread around anyway. This whole thing can happen inside there, which means that this all now becomes import file match match. It equals some call that we do, like you know, find file for import or something, or find matching file for. And so in here, you know, looking at this stuff, that path can just be something that it uses in temporary storage. You know, this thing needs the context file group and that stuff, and it looks like it could pretty much just operate entirely if we just give it that context. And so I think all we really need is, is to pass the context, the subdir, right? So where you wanted to look for it, and then the base name. That may be all you really need. And so if we extract this piece of code out now, you can kind of see how that's getting nice and clean, right? And so in here, if I just say, look, here's the internal code for that. It's going to return you an import file match. Right? This is the entirety. It's really, really straightforward, right? And you can see, again, I say this all the time, but it always bears repeating because it's one of the most common mistakes that even like experienced programmers make. Just, you don't need to pre-factor or think about or design your stuff. That's wasteful. The right way to do it is just write it out messy first and then collapse it up, right? Because then you get exactly the routines you need instead of having to guess which routines you need and then find out later that you forgot something, right? So that just, you know, I didn't have to think ahead of time, like, what are the pieces of this code that would assemble to create an asset system? It's just like, oh, I can see now which pieces are shared by what the code, so just make those, and it's like shooting fish in a barrel, as opposed to shooting fish in an ocean, which is very difficult. So find matching file for just needs to take the exact stuff that we already know that it takes. I don't have to guess about what the parameters are, right? Because we know exactly what it takes. It takes these three things. And then I can verify that it doesn't need anything else, letting the compiler do that work for me, right? There's that subdir, the bitmap base name. So now we can just say, all right, import file match. Starts out as nothing. The subdir is passed in for me. I do one of these format string nonsenses to get, you know, out exactly, you know, what I expect here. This is not a bitmap base name anymore because it could be anything, so I'm going to call it base name. And then, you know, we're going to call the get file by path to load out something that matches that path if it's got it. We're going to then look for the match. That's going to go in here. The assert match call is fine still, right? Because it has to work. We'll go ahead and set that up too. And I think we're all okay. So as far as the error part is concerned, that part I think I want to leave to the external code because I don't know exactly who is calling this or why. So I would like to let them determine the error, especially if in the future I want it to potentially not error, because maybe it wants to look in like more than one place. So instead, that's where that valid thing comes in. So I'm going to do this, where I set valid here. So that way we know that, look, I'm telling you whether it's valid, you issue the error if you want an error. And that also gets me out of the business of having to pass all of the information into the function that's necessary for correctly reporting the error, because maybe some people have some information and some people have other information. I don't want to have to worry too much about that, right? So in this case, the only issue that I get is not knowing what the path actually is there, which is a little bit less good. But I don't know how much I care about that, because you should know like what that actually is. The path part here, so that part is kind of making me change my mind, right? Because if I have the path here, I want to potentially be able to print that out. I could store the path, but I don't really know why I would want to, because it's really only necessary if I'm going to print out the error, right? So that does now kind of make me go, well, all right, I take it back. It's easier for me to pass the token information in, so maybe I just do that, right? Yeah, and just because I don't really want to have to store that or keep that around, it's just wasteful. It's all right. I'm okay with that. I changed my mind very quickly. Off we go. How did I want to pass that? Are those the final two things? They're right after the context. All right. So moving along, if we just need to finish up the import call there, so let's take a look at that. Find matching file 4. There it is. I want to go over here so my head stops being in the way. It's getting in the way too often. So I need to pass the tokenizer and the glyph token here. Not a big deal. I wanted to avoid that, but it didn't work out. That's fine. So here's the code that we need for that. And if I then want to, again, collapse this down so I'm only using this in one place, again, not particularly difficult. All I have to do is say, all right, let's change the way we were doing this. So instead of asset source file and file info being here, and the path and this kind of stuff, I don't want any of that. Instead, I'm just going to do it like this, where we say, okay. Oops. Let's let this call into the other piece of code and produce that match for us here. And then when we were going to use the match before, we don't actually need to do an if match valid. We can actually do that somewhere else. So everywhere that we were looking at match valid, we can do it like this, right? Oh, oops. So here, where we've got match, this is actually going to be source, right? Match.source. And I want to keep going here. Yep. Again, just kind of getting rid of code here. So that seems fine. And then I just need to rename this one so it's result.source there. And I think we're good. All right, let's clean up any compile errors. It doesn't know that. Yeah, it doesn't know that. Oops. Let's just fix that. Keep going. There we go. So this file info is just inside the results. And that's also inside the results. So in here we have, what's our error? Subdir undeclared. Ah, yes. So it's not really subdir in this case, it's fonts, right? That's where we're always looking. Bitmap base name, I thought we did have that. Maybe we don't. It's actually file name, it looks like, right? Go. And then what? It looks like append tags already. It looks like template tags and append tags. Oh, so we already kind of had those nerfed out. Are they always ignored? Yeah. So I guess we don't really need that either. Cannot convert argument 5 from token. Well, that's true. Function does not take 6 parameters. Is that so? Well, how many does it take? Ah, yes. So I forgot to update this with the fact that we now have that import file match. So what I'd like to do there is just say, okay, let's pass that file match in, and then we don't have to pass these around, like I said. So I think that's better. And then in here, where we're actually using those, we have to do something more like this. Oops. Let's see where else we've got usage of that file info. So that's, oops. Seems reasonable. This should tell us where all the errors are, so rather than me hunt for them. So I guess maybe we want to do it like this. So if we modify something, I don't know if we want the modify to propagate out. We might. So I don't know whether we want to, like, you know, we could do it more like this, where we pass this in, and then when we change this, it doesn't get changed in the outer code. I'm going to say let's do it that way for now, and the reason I want to do it that way is because better to not touch other people's data and then later change it so that we do, as opposed to touching it when we don't really need to, because then we're creating more opportunities for, like, surprise, you know? So I would rather be in a situation where, like, let's assume we don't touch the external data, you know, closer to a functional program, right? So there's less surprise, and then if later we determine that we actually need to do that, we can do it then. And that way we don't introduce, like, extraneous chances for failure there that, you know, we would just have been better to avoid. Okay, so I think that's about it. It's like those are all just match source calls. And then that's it. So that should allow us to import those bitmaps as glyphs, and that's a arrow there. Yeah. It's probably asset indexes or something like this. Let's take a look. Actually, I should just jump right to that. Asset indices. Don't ask me why I called it that, but, you know, I did. There we go. Import file match does not have an overloaded operator. That is correct. So, okay. Is that it? That's it. So I think we're now we've got the entire codes sort of like all sketched out, if that makes sense. I really want to take it slow here to try and, because we've done just a tremendous amount of work here on making the asset system sort of have all of this flexibility to it. You can now define tag files that allow you to import whatever you want and mark them up with the data that you want, and it's live. You can change them on the fly and it'll re-import it. You can edit it in the game and it'll save it out. And there's just a lot of moving parts there, right? It's way more complicated than I would have liked to support, but what can you do? Sometimes games just gotta have some stuff. So I feel like that there's probably a lot of bugs lurking around in there. There'll be some obvious ones that we can find right away, but I want to also kind of maybe take it slow as we try to now do some font importing, and I would like to try and make it so that we can step through it carefully, make sure, just make sure we know what we're doing. This, by the way, didn't end up being a problem. So let's do that. Let's just sort of start gently. First things first, we can test is to just make sure that we didn't break anything in the import process. I'm going to load up Remedy, and I'm going to go ahead and grab Win32 Handmade here. I'm going to run it, and, obviously we're in debug mode, so this is going to be kind of slower here. Slow frame rate and skippy sound, which is totally fine for now. But I just want to make sure that we didn't break anything obvious. Like, I want to make sure that if we re-import now, it still works properly. And so I want to test that out, right? So what if I go in now and just delete, like, all the stuff that we've got? Can it rebuild it properly, right? And so inside the Handmade data directory, we've got these HHAs here. And I want to go ahead and, kind of move those out to a temporary sort of holding tank, or maybe just delete them entirely. But, it's in the temp directory. Yeah. So let's suppose I go here and I move base game.hha or .star to temp. And I move intro cutscene.hha or .star to temp. So we've got nothing now. If I go ahead and rerun, and this will be very slow because it's in debug, right? It's not in release, but I want to be able to catch any errors. So I'm going to go ahead and just run it, and we'll go ahead and see if it can actually replace everything properly, not counting the fonts. So this is just a test to see, did I break anything, right? And so what we should be able to see here is the intro cutscene, right? This should kind of grow as it imports all of this stuff. I wish there was a way to see this update in real time. Doesn't, right? But yeah. We need some like periodic size checking program that can let us know. Anyway, so I just want it to run, do all of the intro cutscene import that it's going to do, and I think, although I can't remember, but I think we don't include the font file in here yet anyway, so it shouldn't do any font work yet. So will literally, unless I'm, mistaken, all this should do is test to see if we broke anything, right? How's it going over there in Chatland? Well, we've got some time. Almost there. Are you having any issues with the debugger, or is it okay even if it's an early version? Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been rough around the edges because it's brand new and, you know, it's not even a official version. It's like beta. So there's plenty of stuff, like when I'm working with it, I'm constantly like making sure I take notes if anything doesn't work or if something. And so, you know, it started off a little rough. There's some things that didn't work, whatever. But George has been very responsive to bug reports. Like anything serious gets fixed very quickly. And so at this point, you know, there's features I would like that aren't necessarily there at the moment. But the actual stability of the debugger and the ability to view information has sort of steadied out to the point where I don't find myself encountering problems with it in everyday use much at all. I think he's probably only a few solid weeks, which I know it's hard for him because it's a spare time project, but you know, if he spent a month or two programming on it full time, I think it would probably just be better than Visual Studio in all ways, and that would just be it. It's not far. It just needs a few things like, you know, it can't save mini dumps, I don't think. It doesn't have data breakpoints or conditional breakpoints. It doesn't have a way to select what you want to step into. You know, there's a handful of features that take some work to implement, so it's not like they're just like, 10 seconds. But there's just not that many, and everything else is like light years ahead of Visual Studio. Like, it steps instantly in the watch window, updates instantly. Visual Studio takes seconds to update that watch window sometime, right? It's a disaster. And so, like, everything else about it is just way better. And so I would say probably by next year of this time, I think we'll probably be in a state where you'd be crazy to ever bother installing Visual Studio as a debugger. Like, that'll probably just be a stupid idea, right? So it's going very well, and hopefully it will continue. So it looks like everything imported properly. All the alignments look correct. And like all the stuff is stacked properly, so the points look proper. All that stuff looks good. The environment looks proper. The sound is playing. So I think we're good. Let me run in release mode really quickly just to make sure that the sound doesn't have any issues with it, since we don't really do much to make sure that works in low frame rate yet, so it's hard to tell, right? So I think we didn't break anything, right? And the fact that that loaded instantaneously also means that it correctly knows that there wasn't a change, right? So I think that's good. And I think what we want to do now is just move into the phase of trying to get the fonts in there. Because that's really the only thing now that isn't completely done through a dynamically updating, dynamic packing in-game system. So we'll just finish that up, and then I think we're in pretty good shape. You probably stand to spend a weekend or two screwing with the asset system and cleaning it up, which we may do, because there's so much capability in there now. It's a little bit, we put a lot of stuff in there, and you know, sometimes you want to kind of go through and do some polishing when you've got that much stuff going. So, okay, the first thing we need to do here is we changed how we wanted to write these things out. We decided not to do what we were doing here. So if you look at the code, if you go look at how we decided we wanted these things written out, what you can see is that there's some information missing that needs to get put in the font file, and then there's some information formatted in ways that were not the way we actually wanted them formatted going forward. So I need to go now to process font block, basically, or what's it called, parse font block. And first, this stuff, so the glyph count, the ascender height, the descender height, and the external leading, those all need to actually get written into the file, because at the moment, they're not there. Okay. So when we look at this right here, we're going to have to put 1, 2, 3, 4, glyph count equals, and %u. Right, so that needs to be in here. So we need to go find out what the glyph count is. And then in here, we've got these other guys. They don't have to go in a particular order, but we might as well just put them in the order, like, might as well just do this. So now we do have some floating point stuff in there. We've got the ascender height. That's a floating point. We've got the descender height. That's a floating point. And then we've got the external leading. And other than that, there aren't any other properties of the font that we're storing at the moment. But if we had other ones, that's where they would go. So it looks like these are in here, but they're going to be wrong. If you look at what's happening, so if you look at the ascender height and the descender height and the external leading and stuff like that, if you look at how that's working, like when we get down to stuff like the horizontal advance, when we print that out, we've got to scale it. You know what I mean? So that scale ratio has to come into play here. And I think probably that code was just garbage. If you look at it, the phrase scale, yeah, I mean, when it divides this thing by 4, it's not going to be an even number. So I feel like those horizontal advances have to be floats. I don't know. If you want to keep rounding, fine. I don't really care. So anyway, if we then go to the, the other stuff here, maybe we want those to be, I don't know. I'm sorry. I just have no idea what we want to do here. It looks like we store floats for these. Do we store floats for the horizontal events? We store floats for everything here. It just feels like why not just put it in, why not put a %f? I'm gonna do it. It may be dumb, so I apologize for that. But I'm just gonna say let's do it. No one needs to human edit these font files, so it's just I don't care that it's gonna be spammy and difficult to read. Yeah, it's totally fine with me. So let's clean this stuff up. We've got the horizontal advance, we've got the glyph there. All this stuff looks fine. I don't know why there's a slash. Oh, because that's the output file name, not the stem. Looking at this PNG file name only, where is that coming from? That doesn't seem like what we would want to write. This is the PNG we're trying to import, right? So did that, presumably that code is just busted because we never really worked with it or something, right? If I go in here and load up one of these, is it correct? It's how is it correct? How is that correct? Oh, because it just sets it to... Oh, I'm pretty clever. All right. So it just sets it to point into the same buffer. So as you change the buffer, it just works. That's kind of nuts. But okay, I guess. Moving on from that, what I was trying to say here is all of these things have to be scaled. So the scale ratio needs to multiply like all of this stuff when we export it, because we're exporting the font large and then we're shrinking it down. So when we say the ascender height, descender height, and external leading, we have to scale down by however much that was, right? When we go in here and look at this, we want to write short values out. And in order to write those short values, we need to look at the file formats and include that so that we can call, for example, this stuff, right? I want to be able to do a set align point here where I take a fake alignment point that's, you know, some fake thing like this. I write into the alignment point with the information like the type, the parent, all that stuff. So in here, I want to say, give me the default. I don't know what this is for. I don't know. I have no idea what that's for. So I want to go in here and say, look, let's do an alignment point for type default, right? Which is this one. Yes, it goes to the parent. The size and the p%, for size, we're always 1.0. And for p%, it's this garbage right here, right? Because we've already computed it. We just need to actually pack it down into U16s. So if we do that, now each of these %use is something that I actually know. The first one we just never did, but we have it. It's just the code point, so I can put that in. That's like the UTF-32 version, like of what the code point actually is, right? And then those 2% use are just the p% values that come out of the align point that we just packed. So if I look at these two here, right, I can just print those out as integers now, and off we go. The only weird thing is, like, I'm not storing any of the other align points, but we don't need them because those things are known. Like, a font only ever has these specific alignment points, so we don't really care, and it should be fine. So I think that will correctly give us what we want. I need to include these here. What was that called? File formats, the CVP. Oh, nice typo. So I need those here, and I need to make sure just a function of struct type redefinition. Where was it defined before? Oh, we just like had copied that in here, but we don't need that, right? That can just be, yeah. So now I think we'll be writing out font files that match what we expect. What I don't really remember in here, and we may need to fix this, when we're doing the parsing, you can see us reading all this information out, right? And there's us reading the glyphs, and we're calling this stuff out. I don't think we're setting this align point anywhere. Like, we've got it, right? And we modified it to be whatever we read out of the file, and that's great. But once we actually get this code point here, that bitmap ID never really gets those alignment points attached to it. And it needs that to have happened, right? So that part is a little bit trickier because I don't actually know. once we update that particular piece of information, it's a little bit confusing as to whether we want it to do a re-import or not. I don't think I really necessarily care. So I don't think I'm really going to worry about that. I think what I would rather do is just get the asset and slam the alignment point into it just directly. So in here, you know, if we go ahead and get the actual asset, I mean, I guess I could look if I, let's see, asset data from file. If I look at how that's being done elsewhere, I mean, here is where that's being done here, right? We've got these loops that loop over the asset grid, and then they look to see if they can get the asset, then they write the alignment point into that asset. And I guess, to be honest, looking at that too, you know, that probably should mark the file here if the thing doesn't equal, if they're not equal. So in a way, it kind of feels like maybe you just want this code to be shared, and you pass it an alignment point grid in. So I mean, I don't know. It seems to me like maybe we just want that to happen, and then it will actually get processed properly, and I don't need that to do. Because just if you take a look at what happens here, you know, if I were to go full pull and say when you call update asset data from file, if we actually put this in here where, you know, you had a thing where you would pass in information about what was going on, what we could do is say, well, you know, there's a parameter at the end of this thing, which is like, if it's is art, then we pass in, you know, the what's getting passed here. It's like the align point. So it's this thing, right? We can pass in an align point grid, kind of a thing. And if not, then not. You know what I'm saying? So we could do something like that, and if we did that, then both pieces of code could do the same thing, right? Both would pass down their align points, and that would be fine. I don't know how I feel about it. But then all this is something that says, look, if we got an align points pointer, which would be this nonsense here, so in here where we do update asset data from file, we would have something that said like, look, I want a pointer to this ridiculous array of garbage, and, you know, by default, maybe it can just be 0 if you don't care. I guess I just force you to pass 0 anyway. But, you know, if you pass in one of these, then I'll read the alignment points out of it. How about that, right? And you know, I should probably mention here, so it gets a little, C has some weird ways in which, because it basically relies on artifacts of how parsers work and how parse trees are constructed, some things about it are a little bit weird. You would probably expect, if you were not a C programmer, or if you don't program C a lot, or haven't ever studied this even, you would probably expect this to be declared like this. Meaning if I want an array, because you can see what I want here. I want an array of alignment points, right? I want to pass one of these in, but I don't want to pass like the entire array in. I want to pass like a pointer to the array, right? And so you might think like, oh, I want to do this, but if you did that, what it would mean is actually that you have an array of pointers to alignment points, and you're still passing the whole array. You're passing the whole array of pointers now instead of a whole array of points, but that's the only difference. And so you saw me reflexively do this, and that was just because I, in my head, was like, oh, I need a pointer to this big array of alignment points. The way C treats its parse tree is it works from the identifier name outward. So it starts going outward to the right and then goes outward to the left. And so if you want to make sure that it reads it as a pointer to an array, you need the parentheses. The reason is that since it starts working outward to the right, the first thing it will see when it goes to figure out what type align points is this array asset import grid max. Then it will look at asset import grid max second dimension. Then it will see HH bitmap all point count. Only when it hits the end will it ever look to the left. So its reading then becomes align points is a array of asset import grid max, arrays of asset import grid max, of arrays of HH bitmap, align point count of pointers to alignment points, right? And what I need it to do is I need it to see the star first. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm trying to make sure that it looks at the star as the first thing. So by wrapping it in parentheses, all I was trying to do there is say, hey, read what's in the parentheses first, then keep doing what you're going to do. So then it tries to look to the right and goes, well, there's nothing to the right because I hit a parentheses there, so I have to do everything in the parentheses before I go any further. So then it looks to the left and sees, oh, it's a pointer. Okay, so align points is a pointer to what? To an array of this, array of that, array of this, of that, right? So that's a way of forcing it to go left one time first, and then it can go right. You know? That's all. So if I want to point past something like that in there, then what would happen is this whole thing occurs. And so then I need to dereference this just a little bit like that to make sure I can still use it as an array, but otherwise it's totally fine. I don't even really know now that I think about it whether I need to actually do that star, but I think I do because otherwise I would be accessing an array of those things. So I need to like peel off one of those stars first. It's not super essential to get that right because the compiler will generate an error for you that lets you know that you did that wrong, but you know, it's just worth noting. So if I do that, then I can just pass this in. I also don't need to do this anymore, although I think I will keep doing it. And what that means is that now I can create one of those alignment point arrays like so, and just stuff the data that I need when I parse the font block. I can just have it take care of that for me. So in here, if we create an empty array of these things, then the align point setup that we do here would not go into a fake one, but rather it would do set align point of the specific align point in question. So 0, 0, 0, which is the only one we will ever write, is the one that we're going to set. And then in here, we will pass the align points down as something that gets used. And I probably have to pass the address of that giant block as well, because we are using the address of there, I think. Again, that's one of those things that's always hard. It is implicitly an address, so it might be just fine passing it. But I don't, we'll let the compiler tell me in a second. That's all well and good, and I think then at that point we are done, right? Making that work. Okay, that's an S. And off we go. All good. Okay. Like I said, when we're in this particular routine here, I don't think this was correctly marking these files as having been changed. So when we come through here and write back our alignment points, I feel like this thing should be saying if these two alignment points were not the same, then we need to mark the file as needing to be rewritten. The HHA files, like metadata, needs to get rewritten there, I would think, right? So it's a little bit weird that that's not actually happening, and I don't actually know why it's not doing that. But that's the case. So that's a little bit strange, and I do wonder. So I'm going to move the to-do down into here. That part, it doesn't seem logical to me. So I think we wanted to do there, and we probably want to fix that at some point, because I would have to go make sure that it's actually true, but I think we want to always mark the art assets as having changed if you see a difference in the alignment points that are getting passed in. I could be wrong about that, but I think that's what we want. So yeah, I think that's probably good, but maybe that's not, I don't know, maybe that's not how that should happen, but we'll see. So now that we have this code working properly for everything else, I just need to make sure, well, I guess I should do the rebuild one more time. I'm going to do it in O2 this time so it doesn't take as long. And because I just want to double check that moving this in here didn't break anything. We know that the full rebuild worked just before, so if it doesn't work now, then we know that it has something to do with that move. I'm going to delete the intro cutscene and the base game HHA, and then I'm going to run it. Since we're in release mode, I think it should work a lot more quickly now. In fact, you can actually even see how much faster this thing updates. And then when we're done, I will try loading the fonts. All right. So that seems good. Again, everything seems fine. So we'll leave it at that. If I now want to go look at the font stuff, I think probably all hell's gonna break loose. So let's take it slow. The first thing we need to do is we need to move our test font stuff out of here. So we're gonna move that into temp. And now we don't have fonts. So in theory, if I ran the game, it would just break immediately because there are no fonts. Or Remedy will crash. I am not sure. Okay. If I remember correctly, Visual Studio is currently installed as the debugger. And Visual Studio is broken because its certificate expired or whatever, because, certificates are awesome. And so I can't hit debug and save a mini dump for George, which I need to do. So I think what we want to do here is set up WinDBG as our just-in-time editor. And although it probably requires a reboot. Crap. Well, I'll try it anyway, just in case it doesn't. That's what I wanted. That is not what I wanted. This is what we want. Okay. So what happens in Windows is when it goes and like this, when it detects a fault, it looks to see whether in the registry anyone has registered a debugger that's supposed to launch to debug the program that keeled over, right? And so you can see here where the registry keys are. If I go out, so this is what? HQ local machine, software, it looks like. Microsoft, Windows NT, current version AE debug. All right. So in here, this registry key shows you who is currently registered as the debugger that will handle, you know, any broken, any software that breaks when it's not already running under a debugger. So if I were to change this key to point to WinDebug or something, right, then I should be okay. So in if I open up WinDebug here, like WinDebug preview, right? Let's see. I don't know how to actually get to the place where this is. Where are you, WinDebug preview? Where do you exist right now? So, oh my. Okay. Is that really? Is that really where you are? Seriously? So, in case anyone was wondering, if you bake the version name into the path of the debugger when you install it, exactly what are you supposed to set the registry key to for just-in-time debugging? Because when it updates, it's going to break. I don't know what goes on at Microsoft anymore. It's just... what a madhouse. So here's the debugger. This is because it has to be installed via the Windows Store, which of course is a gigantic pile of garbage that no one should ever use. So I'm going to go ahead and not do that. I'm going to cut and paste all those files because I can. It does. Thank God that it happens to be one of the only things Microsoft ships that does not require you to basically have an entire... it doesn't require you to have like an entire install process to use. So I think if we just go in here and do WinDBG... oh, it looks like we already have a WinDBG preview there. Okay, so I've already done this once. So if I do this, I should be able to do a paste to replace all these files. And then, in theory, now I can point it here instead of to the store, which is an absurd path that won't work for more than like 15 minutes, right? So if we do this, and then, where's the actual, there it is. This is the program, right? There it is. And cut and paste this in there. Now the path is correct, but the problem is I don't actually know if these parameters are the parameters that WinDebug actually needs. So I want to go look at that real quick and make sure that those are correct as well. So it looks like maybe it's that. So we're just going to guess that it is and cross our fingers. It looks very similar to what was there before. So I'm just going to say okay. All right. So now it's the debug shell there. I'm also going to take some quality of life take a minor quality of life step here as well and say maybe while we're at it, let's not make F12 be the key to break into the debugger because that F12 drives me nuts, right? Is set JIT debug break key. I don't really remember what the registry. It's like user debug key or something like that. Oh, is it just sitting there? Actually? Oh, it's user. It's right there. So this needs to be a VK code in order for it to not be set to F12. And so in order to do that, what I would need to do is just look up the VK table. And see if I can't find, like, let's say we use pause maybe. So that's OX13. So hopefully that's fine. And we'll see what happens. Wait. What did you just do? Oh. There we go. So hopefully that's fine. And we'll leave it at that. All right, so that at least, if we save this out, right, our registry is now saved. In theory, we have updated the debugger. I just think you may have to reboot for it to take effect. So when I click debug here, I'm not sure we'll actually get WinDebug, but I'll reboot the machine after the stream. And then, like, next time this happens, it should work. So we'll see. So that looks like I did set it, but not correctly. Is that true? I may have just made it a little bit wrong. Let's see here. Oh, so close. I'm trying not to rage out at Microsoft because it drives me insane all the time. You cannot map drives in a way that works across users. The drive W is not mapped for the administrator, which is what will probably run the debugger. So I need to use the unmapped version of the path in order to tell it where to find this program. So it actually needs to be this. Right? That may be enough. So I think maybe it would have worked and I blew it. So sorry about that. Oh well. So hopefully we can get that crash to happen again. Let's test it and see if we got this working. So what did I do here? I ran it through Remedy, right? There we go. So running it through Remedy is reliably crashing, which is good. So now we can get our JIT working. So let me go ahead and try to get it debugged. Perfect. That's what we wanted. I think, unfortunately, WinDebug is now deciding to download the symbols for the entire operating system because that's just what it wants to do. We don't really care about that. What we care about is capturing a mini dump for George because he can't really debug this crash without more information. You know what I'm saying? So we need to be able to save the mini dump. Now, WinDebug, for some reason, never puts anything in the actual UI. So as far as I know, like there's no, I mean, maybe there's a way to do it up here, but you know, for whatever weird reason, they never like put anything out in the actual, there's never any actual UI. It's like, no, I don't like to have UIs for some reason. So you have to go to the console, which I don't actually know why that's not here at the moment. But if you go to the view menu and get it, which is this. Oh, no, never mind. It is. It's just here for some reason. You can actually do a dump. So I believe it's .dump, or what's the way to get the So I don't know how to get help on this. I'm sorry. I just don't use WinDebug very often. But if we do a .dump, we should be able to say we want a mini dump. I believe M-MA means everything included. And that's saying mini dump with all options. And then we can say, all right, place that somewhere where we can get it. So, you know, C work temp, remedy crash on starting HH. I don't remember what it is, but it's probably a .dmp file. .dump. Oh no, that's the command. Let's see. Do they have any examples? Yeah, .dmp. That's what I thought it is. Let me verify my command line switches while I'm at it, because like I said, don't really remember what they are. I don't use this that often. /MA. That's what we want. Yeah. Large and more complete file. Yeah. All optional additions. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to try that here. There we go. And so now when I'm done today, I can send George that mini dump file, and he should be able to figure out what went wrong there. Again, this is a really nice thing to learn to do if you don't know how to save a mini dump like that. I think Visual Studio has a way to save a mini dump in the file menu. I hope I'm saying that right. But those mini dumps are very valuable because then you can go grab this dump file here, right? Upload it to like a Google Drive or something. They're huge. They get a lot tinier though if you zip them. So if you, oops, nope, don't do that. If you first zip it into a zip file, you get a lot of compression because it's mostly highly compressible memory. That's like zeros and stuff like that, or runs of common numbers and stuff like this. So if you compress it, you get a lot of compression. Probably goes down to 30, 40 megabytes, probably, yeah. So if I just send that now to George, he can load that on his machine in his debugger and see where the program crashed, and also look at some of the variables and the structures, which is really helpful because that way he can maybe get some information about like what happened. So we're going to let him have a crack at that. In the meantime, I want to take a look at debugging this stuff. So what I'm going to do here is, I don't actually know, is it just any startup of Remedy is dangerous right now? I'm not actually sure. So I'm going to take a look. If I open up, went through Handmade, if I hit F11, do I crash? I don't. So it seems like it was something that actually, from just running free, caused it to crash. I'm not sure. But either way, I'm going to see if I can just debug the one part I want to. And we'll let George figure out what's going on later, and we can sort of deal with that part separately. So I'm going to look at this function because that's really the only thing that I wanted to see. We'll see if I can run it. It looks like I can. So we're fine. I don't actually know what the crash was. So looking through here, oh, well, actually, never mind. We don't really need to do this yet because, well, the thing is, this is not going to do anything, right? I don't know why those files got marked as modified. That's probably a bad sign, because they don't need to be, actually. Oops. So we should probably find out why that's happening too. Let me put a to-do in there for that. But what I was going to say is we need to actually put the font information in there first. So we need to track that down at some point. All right. So we run this thing, we get to here. What we need to do is add a new HHT for the font. So besides the 2 that it parses normally, we need like that 1 more in there now for the font. So what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to actually run our font generator and see if we can't get it to produce something that looks usable to us. So let's go to here. Delete all this, and I'm going to run HH font now. So I don't actually remember which fonts we were using. I think it was just the console. I don't know. I think it was probably just this. I don't really know. So I'm going to say this is what we were using, even though I don't know that it was what we were using. Let's suppose it was. We're going to use the test care set. We're going to use the, let's see, liberation mono.hht. And then we're going to write to w10 font, right? So that creates all of our glyphs in theory. You know, here they all are. And they look like they're correct. And so then what we want to do is write this, you know, move this over to our font directory or our sources directory so that there actually is some place where these fonts can live. You know, I guess I would say maybe, do we just want like a separate fonts HHA? Or do we want that to just be included in base game? I don't really know. Let's say it gets included here. Oh. There we go. So here is those fonts. And then maybe in here we say that the HHT file, because we've got the HHT file in here somewhere, right? Although, actually, it doesn't appear that we do. Where did the HHT file go? wtemp, oh, it's back in here. So that HHT file for Liberation Mono, that wants to go somewhere. And I assume that it probably wants to go in the base game directory as well, or I don't know where that wants to go. So if we go to Handmade Tags, and we've got liberation mono.hht, you know, maybe I'll do this. This could be really stupid, but it's just what I'm going to do for now. So this base game.hht could now include that, and if I go into the fonts directory and take a look at this, looks good, right? I could print out these letters much more concisely by looking at them and seeing whether or not they're whole numbers like they are here, and then not including all of the zeros, but, you know, what are you going to do? So let's say I did what I just did there, and in, you know, in base game... Do I have base game open yet? No. In Handmade tags base game, we have the ability to do like a pound include, right? So I'm assuming that here I could do like pound include this file, right? So liberation mono.hht in the fonts directory, because I thought we had something like this, support for this. So then it would do this, right? And, you know, off it would go. It would be nice to be able to place, you know, and I think I'll go ahead and maybe do this. When we extract the font, it would be nice to give it like the author and description fields. As just having come from HH font or something, because otherwise it wouldn't have any. I don't really know. So anyway, if we do the pound include there, I don't really know where it looks for those files. So if we go to asset import, I just want to see when it doesn't include, where does it actually look? And it looks like it would work properly because it looks always in the tags file directory. So I think that would just work. I'm going to go ahead and compile. Oh, wait, I don't need to compile. I guess we only modified the tags file. I'm going to go ahead and watch what happens now. So when we parse that base game HHT, I want to see what happens now if we get if we can parse the font or not, and if so, what happens when we do. So going into the parse HHT, I'm pretty sure that in this case the first one is actually the intro cutscene, which doesn't have an include file in it anyway. So I'm going to skip this one, and we're going to look at the next one. So here's this. This is the actual HHT that we want. One of the first things we see is after the HHT should be that include. So when we hit this include, we're going to say, all right, like what's the file name that we're actually looking at? And there it is. So the text there is fonts liberation. That's exactly what I expect. So we're going to take a look at whether or not we produce a sensible path there. Looks like we do. When we do included file info, we're going to see whether or not we set this up properly. It looks like we sort of do. Maybe all right, so we're in parse top level block, which is wrong. So right off the bat, I think the problem here is we never put in a font block detection. So I think here, this needs to look for fonts, right? You know what I'm saying? So that needs to happen, and now that at least we know that it gets there correctly, I should be able to go ahead and stop us right here instead, because hopefully that'll work. There we go. So here we are in parse font block, and we first look to see whether we get the glyph count, and so let's find out if we do. Oh, sorry. And it looks like we do. It says 100. There's that 100 value. So when we look, okay, that didn't work. So why didn't that work? Glyph count tokens S32 is definitely greater than 100. So we must have missed, one of the parsing things must have errored out. So there was an error. We just don't know what that error actually was. So maybe it was that, yeah, so this is the problem. It's not actually an identifier. In this case, it's a string. Like if you look, it's a quoted string, liberation mono. That seems like probably it should remain that way, because if you look at what happens everywhere else, it is, you know, it's probably should really be the TTF. So if we're going to be more stringent about this, I would say we probably want to take the TTF file name, which is this, and actually make that TTF file name be the thing that gets placed after the font call. So right here. So I don't really know if namestem is the right thing. That's a really tough call. I'll leave it the way it is. But either way, when this parsing happens for parse font block, that needs to be a string, not a identifier. Right? So I think that's what we want to do there. And in our tokenizer, I don't remember if we need to do an unquoted string value call. Just looking to see whether the quotes are included. They're not. All right, so this should work just fine when we get that, because we're doing a required token on that. So that needs to be fixed there. Let me recompile this here. And so now when we actually get to that block, we should be able to enter, because there shouldn't be any errors in it, hopefully. There we go. And so now when we look for the font name text, this should come back with a new file, right? There shouldn't be anything in it because we haven't processed this before. So if I look at font source file, it should have nothing, right? These should all be, you know, nothing, and they are. And it should just have the base name liberation mono. When we start moving through here, we should get the 100 for the glyph count, right? That was the thing that we, that we have there. We allocate our storage here that we're going to be using for the font data itself. We initialize all this stuff to be 0 because we're going to be pulling that out as we go. The first thing we see should be the ascender height, so we should grab that, and then the descender height, and then the external letting. Whether those are all good or not, I don't know, so let's take a look and see if they make sense. The external letting is possibly just the value of these two plus, so that may be correct. I don't actually remember what that value is supposed to be, but I think it might be the addition of those. So ignoring that looks fine. And then we should read a glyph. So reading the glyphs in here, let's see what we get, if these all make sense. Which glyph index? Well, glyph index 0 is not going to be particularly interesting, right? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense, does it? Because that should be this. What am I missing? Token file name. Oh. Looking at the wrong thing. It's this value. That's correct. All right, so set align points, blah, 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 true, 1.0. So that all looks like it's going to go well. Let's look at what the values that are getting passed in here are. Just make sure they're reasonable. Code point, align x, align y. 32 and 0. Is that actually what's in here? No. So that parsing looks kind of broken. Oh, and you can see why. So we weren't using the bracket. So this is actually an error scenario here. And we will end up erroring out. So let's fix that. So now we should be grabbing all of that correctly. We might also, I suppose, want to double check that by the time we get down here, the parsing, like, don't bother doing any of this if the parser was not working. Because we might just end up loading some garbage file and, you know, making a mess of things or crashing unnecessarily. So we'll just do a check there to make sure that we don't, like, go off on some wild tangent. All right, so if we now jump down into there, we grab this stuff out. I'm hoping that I'll see some more sensible information here. Align X still looks wrong, so that should not be 0. So I'm again curious. It should be 32, 4959, 4959, right? So again, not sure if that's a parsing bug or if that's the tokenizer hitting an error. It did. So we still got something a little bit weird, wonky here. We parse the glyph index, which comes in brackets. We're not parsing the brackets either. So this whole thing is kind of just busted. Right? Because these brackets should be around the glyph index, right? Then there should be an equals. Yeah, I don't know. What were we doing here? We were way asleep at the switch. Then there should be an equal sign, right? Then there should be the string, then a comma, then the code point, then another comma, then the brace, then the numbers, and then a brace, right? That's what we should have seen. And somehow that's like not even close to what I wrote there. So I guess we were just kind of not paying attention because there's no way I thought that other thing was actually rational or good, right? So now we've got no errors, which is better. So now this stuff, and it does look correct, right? The glyph index of 1, that is what that is. So that looks good. So let's take a look at this. We're going to have to look into the fonts directory to see if we can find this. Let's see if we're actually loading something that makes sense here, because I'm not actually sure if we are. So here's the path that we're looking, which is base game fonts, liberation, mono. Yeah. That does exist, and we should be able to load it. So hopefully this will work. Looks like it did. When we come out here, we look if the match is valid. It is, so we try to update it using this garbage here. When we come through the code to see if the HHA matches, it doesn't. So we need to do a full rebuild, but we already would have done that anyway. We load the 0 file in here. We go ahead and parse a PNG. And it looks like we got an underflow on this, which... So this PNG is also invalid externally, but because it's 0 size, it's 0 by 0. However, even though that's an illegal PNG and we probably shouldn't write one, I thought our reader would work. And the fact that I'm wrong about that makes me concerned, because that means I don't really understand how this thing was working. So maybe it's actually the case that we have an incorrect, it could be that we don't write out bfinal correctly when we do this export. That's entirely possible. So maybe we should look at that because I would like it to work, even though technically there is no way to produce a valid PNG with 0 by 0 as the dimensions. According to the spec, you're not allowed to do that. So, maybe we shouldn't really do this. We should just not have a file there if there's no, don't export the code point if there's no information. But I just want to make sure this works. So I'm going to try and make it work first. And then we can also go in and not export it later as a separate pass. So if you look here, you can sort of see what would happen if the chunk count just ends up 0, which is what would happen, right? Because the total length is just 0 plus 1, 0 times 4 plus 1 times 0, which is 0. Then all the rest of this stuff will just 0 out, right? So I guess what we have to do here is say if chunk count equals 0, chunk count equals 1. When we come down through this code and we do this loop, this should just not trigger. These should all be 0, and so that should maybe be fine, right? That's my story for now. Let's go ahead and run the font generator thingy. And I guess I can just make this generate the fonts directly into their location. So that would be Handmade sources base game fonts, right? Now, I don't know, like I said, in theory, I think this will still be busted, meaning 32. Also, I guess these are by code point, not by glyph number, which I guess is the right thing to do. Anyway, let's take a look if that helps at all. So I think that wrote to the right place. So W Handmade sources base game fonts. So all I wanted to do was update the PNGs there. Let me just make sure that actually did do that. So it was modified 1 minute ago. That's what I want. And now let me step through that code one more time. So let's try that. So now that time we can parse the PNG, and it should come back as a 0 by 0, and it does. We'll import it, and we'll keep running. Let's see what happens when we get one that actually has data in it. Seems good. So that will keep on running for a while, pulling in bitmaps, and then at the very end, we're hoping we get here. No parse errors, that's great. So that means in theory, we also read the horizontal advanced table properly, in theory. So then we go ahead and say, look, let's get the file that we want to store this font itself in, make that all look reasonable. Needs full rebuild in this case should obviously be true because it's the first time we've ever seen this font. And it is. We set the data for it, which leads to everything looking right. We update the asset data and write it out for the font. And then I think we're done, right? So all of that went well, but then when we go to actually get this font, it looks like the font isn't a font, for lack of a better statement. So we have to figure out what's going on there. And that may be because the font couldn't be found. Yeah. So when it tried to find the font, it couldn't find it. What font is it trying to find? We'll start with that. It's trying to find a font type debug. We haven't created any matches for this yet, so that's probably the problem. We need to specify a tags array probably in there to make the font actually get tagged. But we also don't know if we're setting everything else properly, so there's probably still more work to do there as well. Like, if you look in here, I don't know that we're actually ever setting the font type to font, right? In fact, it doesn't look like we do. So when, you know, this stuff here should get set, and I don't know that we ever are. So, like, inside the HHA itself, this HH font exists inside an HHA asset. That HHA asset is having some of its stuff get written, like this, but I don't think we're ever setting the type, right? We're setting the tags here, but I don't know if we're ever setting the type. Let me look inside update single asset metadata to see if it ever sets the type of the asset, I mean. So looking at HHA.type, you know, I'll be honest, when does that ever get set for anybody? So what am I missing? That has to get set, because if it doesn't get set, there should be assertions about what the piece of data is, and right? So asset, the HHA asset information should be set there. I'm gonna look to see what's going on. Not seeing anything. Actually, you know what I could do? Let's see where we use this stuff. So if I do, where's my asset types? So if I just did something like, tell me every place that I do type equals HHA asset bitmap, where is it? All right, so here is where we're setting this information. This is in write image to HHA, so it's where this stuff gets written out. I'm assuming that process audio import therefore also sets it that way. Yeah, there it is. So we just needed that to happen in the fonts, and we never did, right? So that seems pretty obvious as a first step. And then the other thing is we need to actually tag it so it can get found. In the parse font block code, what I was about to do is exactly what I do want to do, right? So this bit here needs to be asset type, oops, font. So that will at least mark the font as the correct type, which is something that we want. Oops. And that's all well and good, but we also need it to be tagged, presumably, or it won't match, although it might just match by default, even though it's not tagged. That part I'm not sure about. But at least now it will get marked properly in theory, right? And so then we need to actually tag it with something. I do want to look and see... I don't know... Well, I guess, yeah, that doesn't really matter. When you're looking for a font, I don't know why we don't restrict it only to things of the font type, but it doesn't really matter. Anyway, so what we need here is we need to be able to set the font type this way. And that should be pretty easy. I guess in Handmade asset.h, I'm sorry, in, not Handmade asset.h, in Liberation mono.h, we need this to be tagged with something, right? So we need to say, like, you know, tags equals font type. So we need something like that. It's not quite what I would want to have happen. But we'll go with it for now. That looks like it worked. Where are we at here? So string length, who's doing this? Looks like we've got an error problem here. It looks like we're parsing a font block again? What is this magical font block? Where are we? So parsing liberation mono.hht directly? Or when is this happening? No, it's part of the include. So for some reason, so the glyph count is not coming first, and it's required to come first. I forgot about that. But why is that why did that create a bad error message here? What happened? We've done something bad when we went to output like the rest of this information. Well, that looks like an issue right there, potentially. Oh, no, it's not. There's 29, so that's fine. All right, well, let's take a look. So what's the string? String is just a garbage pointer. Of course, it may be because it advanced past it. What were we looking for? We were looking for this temp here. So that's all just, yeah, we couldn't get the arg out. So it's this call. Oh no! So I don't normally get a lot of crashes in Remedy. I guess this latest version must have had something weird happening in it. Because, like, I used it all week and never had any crashes. So, I don't know. I must be doing something weird. I'm sure George will know what it is, but let's see. Let me write this out. It's probably just something specific in our PDB that's bad. So So now we got both dump files. We should be able to send it to him. So I'm not really sure what's going on with that, and I'm gonna, even though I know what we want to do is move this, I want to run again and see if we can't figure out what went wrong there, because it shouldn't. That error should be allowed, and it should print out properly. It shouldn't crash like that. So something's busted there. So if I look at what we're passing here. So will it crash again if I try to inspect this format? Yeah. So it's like it can't, for some reason it can't look at that. It's super dangerous for some reason. So expected %s with match looks okay, right? Because that's, it's glyph count. That's what you would expect. So that's getting passed down here, and then it's issuing the error. And, presumably, okay, so it's just the name format. It doesn't matter where it's like, I don't know if it's because format's also a function or something. I'm not sure. But it just does not want to inspect that. So I don't know what would be wrong with that, because it looks right to me, and I'm not sure what it's having a problem with there. Calling required field with, all right, so the format is like just a % lowercase s is what's coming down as format, and the match string. So then when we get to here, we're getting that %s and the arg list for that, which is one arg list. We're then going into outf arg list, and so this format is just a %s format string, and the arg list is one char star. Right, which is exact. Oops, I didn't mean to do that. Oh, I think I like that better. Yeah, okay. So I think that's, like, I don't know why that would be weird. Let me double check the format string and make sure I'm not crazy. I mean, it's just a %s and a, yeah. So. Although, I see the bug. We have had this bug before. We're kind of fired for having the same bug twice. So the problem here is that it's looking at VA arg list, which happens to, it is not actually matching the type because it happens to be a nonsense like pound define thing the C runtime library does. So really we need this to be error arg list, and we need to do this so that because it was picking the wrong overloaded function. So that's all that was happening there, right? So that was just a overloading nonsense. We should be fine now. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why, but we just have to make sure those are differentiated. Okay, so this time it should actually just run properly, but produce the errors and then get back to our original, like, we can't find the font. And so I think I can now safely say that since we fixed that thing, if I go to Liberation Monolith, if I add the tags below the GIF count, now that should be allowed. And so now we should tag them, but it looks like we're still not finding them. There could be a lot of reasons for that, and so I probably will save that debugging for tomorrow, but I think we're good to go now. In basically everything except maybe how those tags are getting set up there. I want to look just real quick though, when we do the initialization for the fonts, I want to look at this call just real quick. So when we do get best match asset with a particular basic category, I'm guessing the problem is just, the problem is that basic category never got tagged. So maybe I won't save all the debugging from out. Let me just fix that one minor issue first, which is that the basic category for this thing never got set. So when we're doing those append tags here, there's the append tags thing that comes in here, this thing. We actually do need to write out the tags. It does need to have its basic type set, and it's not happening. I thought this would do it, but it's not doing it, and I'm guessing that the reason it's not doing it is because that, like, doesn't this do that? I guess it doesn't do it. It's this. Right? That's not happening, and also it's not really getting set properly. So we do need to do that in here before we export this thing. We want to use one of these. So I'm going to pull this down, the append tags, and say that this, because this thing, where we're importing the bitmap, we never want to have tags. But this asset, we do actually want to have tags. So here we want to do like begin tag builder nonsense, this thing. So we want this thing to build the grid tag in question for our append tags. And this tag array here with the first and last thing, I don't know what import grid tag really has to do with it. It's just, oh, it's that, right? So we just want this to happen, and then we want our append tags to be combined tags like that, right? So this will give it the tag that says what its base type is, which is what it needs to be found. I don't really know. Oh, and that also, okay. So that also needs to be there. So I guess I really want it both ways, right? I want this thing to have null tags. And I do want to track the append tags because the parser wants to add things to that, right? So I do want this. And then the template tags, I guess, is the place that I want this to go. Right? So I think I really want that, as weird as it sounds. Import tag array. In fact, it's just that. So I think that's what I want. Because that way it properly gets marked as a font, which is what I actually want, I think. But we'll find out. This code could stand for some nice cleanup. There's too many moving pieces that don't really need to be there. No, still didn't quite work. So I'm going to save that debugging for tomorrow because this is the part now that needs to get set up properly. And when this update single asset metadata call gets called, right, that should call set data type there. So the import grid tags here that are getting passed. It looks like extra tags for the import grid tag is actually where I wanted that even. So too much tags. I think part of the problem is these tags just are out of control. We need to like make a cleaner way of handling tags and writing them, right? Which wouldn't be hard. Okay, so let's see if that got it matched properly. No, still not. But something like that should be working, and we should get it. I'm sorry I'm obsessing here. I said I was going to wait till tomorrow, but I keep not doing that. If I do parse font block here, yeah, so that's the problem, is that's actually not getting entered. So why not? So there is an error. What's the error? So that file, as we expect, unrecognized tag name. Unsurprising. There we go. And so now we are creating that font tag. This should now actually add that font type. So hopefully, yeah, there we go. Hopefully we now have a font. So whether the font works or not, it doesn't look like it does, because we should be seeing something up here, right? And so it looks like we're not. It looks like we're not properly getting that font, but at least we're closer than we were before, right? And it looks like here, right, because this is the font. This is probably the font code, right? And it's getting like, you know, probably garbage IDs or something. Yeah. It's probably getting like weird. Yeah, it's getting like out of range IDs. So it's just a little bit borked. Looking at yeah, we're probably like putting the wrong data into like the the glyph map or whatever. So like, for example, inside the parse font block, if you look at what's going on in here, like this write asset data is probably like writing stuff out incorrectly. Excuse me. Like, and maybe we're setting this stuff wrong. Who knows? It's code points. Oh. Is this... Okay, so this is getting set here. So yeah, the Unicode code point gets set, and then the bitmap ID ostensibly gets set. Actually, that, though, needs to happen regardless. So, meaning this has to happen always, because even if you don't import the thing, you still need to set the bitmap ID for the font in case it gets written out, right? So that actually does always need to be there, and it needs to be an error if for some reason you can't find a font glyph. And hopefully that already would have been an error, so, you know, it's really a duplicate error, but just in case, you know, we double mark it. That seems better. Possibly, maybe. And I don't know, like, that's a change to the code, which we don't really support right now in terms of diffing. So we are at a bit of a disadvantage because I don't know if that will actually update our font. It probably won't, right? So we're going to hit this either way. So let me go ahead and set a breakpoint in parse font block because I don't think it will actually properly come back down here. We'll see. So oh, interesting. I wonder why that is. So that seems like a bug too. I really have to stop debugging. Sorry. You know how I am when I start. I just like want to fix the problems. So it's a little bit difficult. But so, you know, this right here, why are we not getting our font? What does this stuff look like? Does it look valid? Looks pretty good. .508. That seems like right where it should be. Let's see what the last one says. .502. That looks really fine to me. HHT-Data offset, because we did a reserve on it with the data size. That seems right. Does it not? I don't know. It seems pretty good. What's the code point size? 800? That's exactly what I would expect. Well, in for a penny, in for a pound. What happens when we actually ask to load this font, right? So here's the font. Asset number 507. You know, here we go trying to figure out how big we're supposed to load it up. It's 800 just like we thought. So off we go. It read it okay. So what's the deal? If we actually look at font glyphs, do we get the same stuff we were just looking at? Sure looks like it. So what's the problem? Alright, so I guess we fixed it. No, we didn't. So what's the problem? How are we getting this weird garbage? How are we getting like 626 back for this thing? That doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? We've got the font, and we know what code point we're looking for. So if I open up the font table and I look at the Unicode mapping, right, I should be able to do like font, Unicode map, and then look at code point 85. So it says to look at 54. So we'll look at 54. It says bitmap ID 457. So how did it return 626? There's something I don't understand. I probably forgot that we did about the fonts, and now it came back to bite me. So let's find out what is happening. Get glyph from code point. This is exactly what I just did, right? I mean, that is what I did for code. By the way, what code point are we looking for? 85. Hey, great. So looking at the Unicode map, it should return me the value 54, right? Yes. Then when we do get bitmap for glyph, I should see. Ah, okay. I see. I will now explain what's happening. And I guess it's actually quite easy for us to fix. And I guess it's all fine. Because we use asset IDs at runtime that are merged, meaning there is only one index that is used to access an asset. And so even if there were many HHA files that were all loaded into the game at launch, you can still just use one integer to refer to an asset. There's only two ways you can really make a system like that work. One is to pre-allocate all of your asset IDs to make sure they don't conflict, such as what we did on the witness, for example. But another way, which is the way we use here, is that at runtime when you load, you have a rebasing value that anyone who needs to refer to something by an ID offset actually knows to use the part in the when you loaded this HHA, how far did it have to get moved up to assure that it didn't conflict with any other HHAs, and you use that offset. Since we don't really ever do that other than with fonts, because they're the only things that are actual assets that refer to other assets, we forgot to actually apply that difference. So in here where we set this bitmap ID, the actual source index in question here that says which asset we used when we imported this thing, that needs to be slid back by whatever this asset source file actually had its base value be, because that value is going to get added back to it when we go to expand the font, right? Because the font, when it looks at the bitmap ID, it's going to rebase that value by however much it thought the file was slid up. So in that asset here, this asset base value needs to be subtracted away, right? So we need to use this asset file, the actual destination asset file, which we know, but we need to actually use that to subtract off the value here, right? And so what I'd like to do is say, okay, wherever we were going to write this thing, and you know what I might do too? I might say we could do this as a separate pass, because I think that might be a little bit safer. So once we get down in here and we say, look, what are we writing to? We've got this dest file index, right? So now I should be able to go and say, get or asset file. No. It's not that. It is... There it is. So what I need to be able to do here is say, look, give me the asset file back. Oh, and it looks like I'm already doing that, right? So here we have the asset file. And then I need to run over my array here and rebase these things. So the asset base needs to get subtracted from that glyph, that code point bitmap index, right? So when we actually do this, right, I need to make that value get subtracted away. So for each code point, right before I save it out, I need to go through and rebase it so that they're all in the right position. What is this code? Points, I think. Yeah. So let's just double check that. Right, so you can see this happening here where this asset base needs to be adjusted. Perfect. Hey, look, our font importing works now. Or it sort of works, at least. Who knows? It looks like the spacing is a little tight or something. I don't know. That could be correct. I'm not entirely sure. But it looks a little off. So I think maybe there's still some bugs in there. I wouldn't call that done yet, but it's pretty close, right? All right, let's double check that everything in there is working, and then we'll call it a day. So tomorrow we'll just have to debug why some of those don't look quite right to me, or at least, I don't know, they don't seem to. So if I change to O2 here, so this all seems to be working properly. I'm just not sure about the font alignment necessarily. I'm not sure if it's quite right. But I don't see any font, like obvious font bugs. So I think we're pretty close, right? All right. Okay, we'll go to brief Q&A, but I think we're done. So let's go ahead and... If you had to support ligatures, for instance, FFI can opt to become a single glyph when using some fonts, how would you store that information in an asset file? I think Arabic works in a similar way. What about substitutions, like in some fonts, uppercase Q can have a longer tail when in front of a U, like in Quest? So, typically speaking, that is not stored in the asset file because you don't need to, right? A ligature is its own code point. Just to give you some perspective on that, right? So languages that have ligatures typically get their own code points. So all you would do is say that you wanted the FFI code point in your actual, well, you know what? if you want, we can just do it. Basically, but all you would do is say, include this in the font set. So remember how I said we want to be able to have lots of different types of character maps? This is why. So in here, we included the kanji owl, right? And the reason we included the kanji owl is because we wanted to be able to put these like text characters in there. If you remember, our text op has some kind of nonsense for code points, I think. Yeah, so if you do a backslash and then 4 hex digits, it'll just put in that thing. So, I mean, we can just do it if we want to. I might as well demo this, right? So, for example, if we wanted the kanji owl in there, if I went into the editor and for no good reason, you know, in the camera section or something, let me go, right, like we could just do that, and once we run that, when we output our strings, when it looks at a string, if it sees a code point specified directly, it will look up that in the font as a code point number, right? Or maybe not. Did I read that wrong? It was a backslash, wasn't it? Right, this is the, it's backslash x. Are we not calling text up? We must be calling text up, right? What does button and stuff call? I don't even know. Yeah, it's calling text up. So I'm not sure why that isn't, because like this is the code that gets that. I guess I should look at is hex. Oh, okay. So for whatever reason, we decided it had to be, our format was it had to be uppercase. Why? I'm gonna say no to that. I don't know why we wouldn't want our is hex to allow lowercase, so I'm just going to change that. All right, let's try that again. All right, so when we do this, it should parse that code point and we should be able to see it. I'm not sure, it looks like it couldn't find that particular code point, but I thought I used one that we would have, although this may be broken as well. Yep. There it is. So although we weren't supporting lowercase characters for some reason, so that was a longer excursion than I had hoped, but you can see that it just inserts whatever the code point is there. So if we wanted to do the ligature thing that you were talking about, what we would want to do there is, and you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember what is, okay, FC5COF. So let's say for some reason we wanted to say like that there was a ligature in here, right? Like that. And so, you know, we run it and we get this, and you know, you want it to have the actual like real ligature across to the eye, let's just say, right? Then what you would do is inside HH font, you would say, hey, let's get the ligatures. And in here, we would, you know, put those in here. While we're at it, we should just look up all the ones that, you know, you might want. Here you go. So in English, which is the only thing we're currently doing, and when you expand to other languages, we would want to go expand this out. I think these are the only ones that I normally see, right? FT and these. So what we'd want to do is support all that, right? So we'd say like, okay, basically FB0 through FB5. So we'd include all of those ligatures in our actual font export. And again, that's just a test set. So, you know, eventually we'd make one of these for English and one for, you know, French or whatever, you know, the languages that you wanted to support as you like build out your localization plan or whatever you wanted to do there, right? And then when we run HH fonts and have it dump the thing out, now there's going to be some more glyphs than there were originally. So if we go to liberationmono.hht, this is the only part that we're adding in, so everything else should be fine. So all I would say is like, let's just copy that. Okay. And now when we load it, it should have more stuff. And you can see that it does, right? So let me put that tags in there. I want a way to inject these tags. I don't really want to edit this file. So that's something that it would be nice to be able to do. So now if we saved it, in theory, we should be able to use that actual ligature instead of the FFI. So in here we've got that FFI. I want to typeset with ligatures. So what I actually do here instead is I specify the actual ligature for FFI, which I don't remember which one that is, FB03. So if this font had that ligature, which I don't think it does, we would see an actual thing there. Instead, we just see that little missing symbol, which I assume is what that is. Although maybe we got the, I don't know, maybe I got the glyph point wrong. But who knows, right? But that's all you would do. I don't really know how to determine whether we got that right or wrong. I guess we would have to look. So I don't really know how to do this in a test. So if I select Liberation Mono, and I do an insert special character, I don't know if you can. Yeah, you can. That did not work at all. Is there a reason it doesn't know? So is it because this is clipping me out? I want to know, I don't really know how I can go about testing the font to see if it has this ligature. I don't have like a font editor installed on this machine. So I'm assuming that like Sego would have like all of them, because it's like a Microsoft standard UI font. So let me see if this lets me insert that special character. So there it is, right? And so I suspect the problem we are having is that like Liberation Mono just doesn't have it. So that's why we couldn't extract it. So if I go here and do Liberation Mono, it looks like it's still Arial, right? Like it can't change it. I'm sorry. Yeah, it can't. Oh well, no, wait. But that's not Liberation Mono, is it? Because it's not monospace. So I don't know. It must be doing a font substitution there. It's probably doing a font substitution. So yeah, because that's not the F. You know. So I don't know. I don't know how to determine what just happened there. I wish I knew how to look at a font more specifically. So what we could do is change which font we're loading just real quick. So like for example, I could in here say I don't actually know where that font file is, but we can find out. So like Sego UI regular. And I'll just do like that. And so in theory, that will have those ligatures included with it. And if I move Sego UI, or copy, I should say, Sego UI to here, then in theory I can include that instead, and see if that allows us to pull the ligature or not. If I went into the Sego UI file and throw the same tag in there, oops. So that it can be picked as a debug font. Then if I went to basegame.hht, in here I could do like #include fonts Sego UI.hht. And that would pull that in as another font. I don't think we support like deleting the font from the HHT really at the moment. So I'm not sure this is actually going to work, but we can try it. At the very least, I can probably just delete everything and restart the packing. Yeah, so that's still the old one. So let me do... We don't really have a way of saying, I didn't see this thing, so delete the asset, right? I think the only thing we have for that is just like, you got to repack. which isn't great, but it's not the end of the world. I don't. Do we have anything to stuff that? Wow, Remedy's really acting up today. It looks like any time Handmade Hero was going to crash, it looks like Remedy couldn't handle it for some reason. Like it got into like some kind of a bad state. You know what I mean? Yeah. Did I spell that wrong or something? It's just having the problem of not finding a font, which we probably should make not crash. Like we should probably just have that work okay. Because it wouldn't normally crash. It's an assertion. So, you know, if we just compiled in release mode, it wouldn't crash. It would just run. So it seems bad to like box ourselves that way. But so is that actually the correct name for that? SEGOEUI.HHT. That seems right. It's got the tags in there. What was the problem? Files look good, I think. Yeah, I don't know. Well, I'm just going to see what happens here if we can step in. Oops. So, wow, no, I guess it just can't do it. All right, well, we'll deal with this tomorrow, I guess. And maybe we can see if there's a patch for Remedy, because I'm not sure. I have not had that problem. It seems like something in the latest build, maybe. But I'm not sure what the problem is. But anyway, if we use a font where the ligature actually exists, presumably we can get it. If I look in here too and just look at the Sago, we should be able to see if the ligature actually got exported. It looks like it did, right? So that was the reason we weren't getting it before. I assumed that for the other one, Liberation Mono, there's no ligature. So it looks like FI and FL got exported, sort of, right? I mean, they're not actual ligatures, but they did get exported. But for some reason, some of these other ones just didn't, and I don't know why Windows Font Mapper in particular has an issue with that. But that's all you would do for ligatures, is that. And I wouldn't recommend doing it really any other way. You want to be able to it might be tempting to say, well, let me just, every time I output strings, look for FFI and replace it with the ligature. That's not a great idea typically, because you usually want control over whether the ligature is used or not used in any given context. And so it's usually better, even if you do an automated system like that, do it at creation time so you can hand tune it as necessary. Don't do it like on the fly, because then sometimes the rule may be wrong and you don't, and it's bad, right? So, you know, that's something to keep in mind. It's not there's not one kanji for owl, right? It was a string. it was a bunch of them. I thought we did. We did 4 of them. So I'm not sure which it was. It was these 4, or maybe they were just other test ones. But it was. Because I remember we looked it up and it was like a specific kind of owl too or something. I don't remember exactly what we did. We have to go back to the video, but it was specifically all of these put together that we used. And I don't remember why. Why we didn't just use this, I don't know. But there was some kind of nonsense like that. Yeah, does anyone remember why it was a big block of text we used, and I don't remember why. Maybe we did this? I don't know. Well, we didn't use that. So yeah, I don't know why I don't know. You got me, man. We should go back and look because we went. Yes, I know that means small, but I don't remember what the other characters mean at all. Although one of them was like day or something, wasn't it? Or moon or something. I can't remember where I don't remember what they were. It was like the 3. That one's wood, right? The one, the tree one. So anyway, I don't know where we got the kanji for owl. It would have been nicer to just use that, but I don't think for some reason we didn't find that. So. I noticed that you declare the platform struct with all the function pointers as extern in Handmade platform.h. How does the linker resolve that? Isn't the platform in a different executable? Well, the reason that that's declared as extern in platform.h, I think, though, has nothing to do with what executable it's in. I think that was done because we wanted to be able to build 2-part executables. There was a reason why we did that. It was like, oh, we want the ping loader to be able to create a platform context and stuff like that. So I don't think it had anything to do with it wasn't because we were separating them across the DLL boundaries or anything like that, because we pass it into the game. How do we render text, and do you have any thoughts on dealing with large number of glyphs such as in Chinese? We already deal with that just fine. We allow you to use any Unicode code points you want, and we just fill up the glyphs tables as necessary. If you want to pile 3,000 characters in there, go right ahead. Since all of our art is paged on demand, it will just load the symbols that are necessary, right? One thing I would like to do is have a smaller bitmaps table. Like right now we use 512, 512 for everything, which is way too big for glyphs. we probably want a 6464 like glyph table as well to store small things like small font info. But that's sort of that's an optimization for saving memory. Sort of another thing. Do you think most of the optimizations used are domain specific, i.e. game development related? And if so, do you think it's possible to couple optimizations and algorithms in the context of games? I'm not sure I understand the question. I don't really think of optimizations as being domain specific. Typically, optimizations are about like how you map an algorithm to the CPU, which doesn't tend to depend on whether you're using it in a game or elsewhere. It is true that sometimes you optimize things in games that don't ever occur elsewhere. So like, I mean, you know, oh, I'm doing something with inner products that can be pretty approximated here, whereas it couldn't be approximated elsewhere. So I don't know. I'm trying to make something up. I'm not sure I'm really coming up with much, to be honest. What was your experience with Cygnused on the Amiga? How do you compare it to Emacs? I would say that Cygnused doesn't really have very many text editing features as compared to Emacs, so it's pretty underpowered because it's obviously hasn't had the billions of hours of time making weird extensions and stuff that Emacs has had. But man, the speed. Like, Cygnused is so much faster than Emacs. So Cygnused on the Amiga has a like much higher frame rate than Emacs on today's machine. Like, no joke. Cygnused was 60 frames a second always. Emacs has never heard of 60 frames a second. That they don't like 60 frames a second is like some mythical thing that Richard Stallman doesn't believe exists or something, right? It looks like Miblo has located where we found the owl thing. So, did anyone manage to figure out what the heck, where we found those characters or why? I mean, it's weird because, like, here's a ton of different types of owls, none of which are the symbols we ended up with. So I don't know where we got that from. We should probably fix it. This seems like a pretty definitive page. I mean, if you're telling how to translate a shrike and a grebe, you probably know what you're doing. Because those are some pretty arbitrarily weird bird names, right? That this is starting to look, because that looks like what we got. So maybe it was like a small-eared owl. You know what I'm saying? So that, that sounds vaguely plausible. Would you agree with that? That maybe we were trying to say like small-eared owl. Because I think this is what we had, and then we just had small. We had this. We also had small. I don't see small-eared owl here, but yeah, but it seems. Seems. Okay, short-eared owl. Okay. Yeah. All right, so we didn't write it totally wrong, but we did pick a very specific kind of owl, it seems, which is fine with me. All right, I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you, everyone, for joining me for another episode of Handmade Hero. It's been a pleasure coding with you, as always. If you want to follow along the series at home, you can always pre-order the game at handmadehero.org, and it comes with the source code so that you can play around with it. I'll be back tomorrow. I'd like to see why we're not loading Sago properly. And then, like I said, I think we probably want to just, like, churn a little bit on this system. Maybe just do some refinement now that everything works. Some of it's still kind of janky, and we don't really want to fight it. Like, we want it to kind of be nice and smooth. So it now might be a good time to just kind of like clean this stuff up and make sure that everything works okay. So hope to see you back here for that. Until then, have fun programming, and I'll see everyone on the internet. Take it easy, everybody.